Say, for example, if the humanity has evolved to its current technological potential, say a few thousand years earlier, and we were just coming into the ice age, and the environment was actually cooling. Do you not think that the exact same hysteria would be taking place as it is now, with people claiming just the opposite direction of how we're affecting the climate? Because all of a sudden there is this massive change taking place, which has nothing to do with us, but us being very sapiens centric, very self-centered creatures that we are, we think like clearly we're doing this to our planet. Look, everything is freezing all around us. The monkeys are disappearing. The tigers are growing saber teeth. The elephants are becoming all mammothy and woolly. What is going
Uh-huh.
on? This is an apocalypse and we have caused it.
Right. Well, that may be fair, and certainly you'd be justified in worrying about the ice age coming because that would bring 3 or 4 kilometers of ice over a good portion of North America that's currently inhabited by major cities. So you'd have reason to worry. But what I didn't hear there is a mechanism. Uh, how would this technology that humans are using be creating all of that ice and causing an ice age? Whereas we do have a mechanism to explain how humans are causing the current climate change, which is called the greenhouse effect, and that's been well documented by scientists, and it's not considered controversial at this point in the scientific community that humans are having an impact on climate change. Not that
Fair,
we're the only cause, but that we are a significant cause of the current rise.
Fair enough, and I mean, I think that's a good point. However, there is also a larger point where people are saying, "Well, our activity on Earth here is causing a destabilizing effect on climate." So now they're attributing things like hurricanes and a bunch of atmospheric events. They're saying that we are to be blamed for that as well. So if it's
For
just
canes?
hurricanes.
Oh, hurricanes. Okay.
I'm talking about tornadoes and the twisters that are ripping up people's houses and stuff. And all of a sudden, it's not just about greenhouse gases. It's about the larger phenomena in the atmosphere and the ecosystem as a whole. So wouldn't you say that uh, I guess the question is our theory of how we're impacting Earth, um, did we arrive at it just because this is the best explanation we have, or is it the one that is actually correct? Because once again, like my stance is that if we found ourselves on a precipice of the ice age, we would come up with an equally plausible explanation for how our activities are causing that, and I think we would be completely convinced in our culpability.
Well, this is an, an interesting angle because you're you're taking on science here. You're dismissing science. It's going to be probably difficult for us to sort out the actual science that has led.
I'm
Um,
not dismissing science per se. I'm dismissing, I guess, the stopping point of science or the motivation behind it, right? Because um, like we're seeking to explain phenomenon. Like, are we seeking to find truth, or are we seeking to find um, our? Are we seeking to prove our subconscious beliefs about how things are? Because in a
well,
complex system such as atmosphere, um, there are going to be multiple potential explanations for things, and one of the cool things about natural systems is that they tend to be self-correcting. So sure, we are adding, we are an influencer within this system, and probably a major one. but to say that we are shifting the balance of things to an irreparable degree is, I think that is something that ought to be considered for sure, but the degree to which we have accepted it as a given seems to me somewhat rushed and under justified.
Okay, let me address these things. Again, the answer that what you're attacking here is in the science. The only way to address that question of what has the science led us to and what has motivated it, and is it accurate? We have a couple options. One is to actually delve into the science itself, crack open the models, which I don't know that we're going to have the ability to do it here in this conversation. Or two, say, well, what do we know about the scientific process that has led to these conclusions, and is it likely to be flawed in that way? So I'm going to go with number two, since we don't have the literature at hand. It's the IPC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, with the UN, that summarizes and reviews all the work of climate scientists across the world doing climate modeling, etc. And they've come up with a pretty, what's it called? Not quite unanimous, but nearly unanimous, which is a feat in science, summary of climate models that suggests, yes, there is a problem. There's some variation amongst them because modeling is a difficult thing to do. But they all point to the average temperature of the Earth rising by at least a couple of degrees over the coming decades, and this being caused largely by the greenhouse effect. So I'm not sure how else to answer that question of is the science accurate, other than to explain why it would not be. It's not just a couple of random people in a lab. It is the gold standard of answering a question like this is to do a systematic review of all the literature, and you have sort of the highest body that we have, the highest governmental body we have in the world, looking at that. So we've tried to put in as many standards as we possibly can. And there's every reason to understand that hurricanes and tornadoes and things like that are linked to the overall climate. So if you raise the temperature of the Earth with the greenhouse effect, that doesn't not affect other things. That doesn't just happen in a vacuum. All of the weather patterns, etc., are going to be connected to that, which we can go into if you want.
Right. Well, I mean, maybe we should examine them in greater detail, because obviously I think it makes a lot of sense that there is going to be a cause and effect relationship with the activities that we do. What I believe isn't as well established as you're pointing out is the actual effects that are going to transpire over the coming years, because hasn't it been also a consensus of the climate scientists that essentially the error of this predictive model is basically as big as the predicted effects of what it's going to for example, the rising sea levels? There is no clear scientific support for it that goes beyond the reasonable doubt.
Okay, I have not heard that before, but that is possible. And let's just say it is, right? Okay, so let me specify what that means exactly. So let's say the error is the same as the predicted effect. So let's say the predicted effect of a bunch of models is that there's going to be a 2 meter sea level rise. So if the standard error is the same as that, then that means the real prediction is there's going to be a 0 to 4 meter sea rise. So it could be as low as 0 meters, or it could be as high as 4 meters. That's
Hmm.
the definition of what you're saying there. So let's say that that is the case, which I'm not certain, but I think that's totally reasonable for a model that there could be that level of error. Why would we not act? Like, if the range is either 0 to 4 meters, best case scenario, it's 0. But what are the odds it's going to be on the extreme end of that spectrum? Chances are it's going to be somewhere between 0 and 4. So why would we not prepare and act accordingly?
Well, the question, I guess, becomes is uh, for whom, up to whom is the action in this case? Because we know, for example, that the major contributors to CO2 pollution are outside of the Western Hemisphere, and also kind of outside of the direct Western control of of our political and social norms. Therefore, does our alarmism really contribute much? Does any good in ameliorating any of these issues?
Well, I think it's going to have to be a global effort and a global solution. So when countries get together for climate change meetings to discuss like joint policies that everyone can agree on, emission standards and limits and plans, they should try to get as many countries from the world to sit down at the table as possible. And yes, the developing countries will have a bigger role than the already developed ones because they're emitting more.
And one other thing that I think is interesting to discuss, since this is kind of like a pretty global issue that also requires forward thinking. Does it really matter? And what I mean is, say for example, we do raise the sea levels by a few meters in the coming decades. The projection still is that the global population will collapse drastically within the next 100 or so years. So wouldn't this be just a blip on the radar where, sure, as part of our human development, we have caused oceans to rise up a bit, and then it'll as we transition to the more sustainable sources of energy, and as the population of the globe decreases, this will be a non-issue.
Wait, are you suggesting the population of the globe will decrease because of all of this? Because
No, because of economic development. Because the more people earn, the less kids they have, and the current projections of the world is such that the population growth is going to reverse within the next short while, and it's going to diminish drastically in the coming decades. And this is what.
nah, I think the projection, as I understand it, is that the population growth level will diminish drastically, but not the population itself. It will top out and be fairly stable, somewhere
Mm,
between like 10 or 12 billion people.
no, that's not my understanding. There is an actual prediction of population collapse, and this is like the only thing that Elon Musk and Jack Ma actually agreed on during their conversation about the future of humanity in the artificial intelligence symposium that they took part in.
Hmm.
And I think if those two dudes think that that's what's up, I feel like that's what's up.
Huh. Well, I'm gonna have to hear that one, because I think they might have just misspoken. But I definitely want to hear that projection if that is a serious projection that the population is going to majorly decline, because I think it's going to stabilize. But let's just say it is. Let's just assume that that's right. Um, I believe that this does matter, because your question being, well, in the grand scheme of things, so what? The human population is going to be changing anyways, and perhaps we'll stabilize under a new model. And what's the big deal? Well, think about this. If we want to talk about like worst case scenarios that are not really that unlikely, think of how much discord and chaos was caused by something like 1 million Syrians fleeing Syria and having to settle in Europe. Think of how much of the current political instability in Europe was caused by mass immigration and disagreements about mass immigration. And that was like 1 million people. Now imagine if the sea level rises and floods out Bangladesh, which is predicted to happen in the climate change models. You have 100 million people all living on the delta of the Ganges River, which is extremely shallow. It's all around sea level. So you might have tens of millions of climate refugees at that point. And if Europe has been brought to like the verge of tearing itself apart politically over 1 million refugees, what are tens of millions of refugees going to do? So to me, the real danger of climate change is in the human conflict that it will produce. And when you have humans at conflict with each other, we can do a lot more damage than just a few meters of sea level rise. We're armed with nuclear weapons and various other things. We can do much greater damage than all of that.
So isn't resettlement and repopulation the answer here? Because it's not like you can, again, like the major polluters are the developing economies, right? So it's not like you can tell these people to stop polluting and join the cool club, whereas they haven't reached the level where that is a viable option for them. So it seems like the question becomes one of mitigation rather than of actual substantive change.
I'd say why not shoot for both?
Well, certainly to a degree, yes, but again, like, who is going to tell China to stop burning coal?
Well, as I understand it, they've already taken some steps themselves in investing in green technology. It's a different era. Yes, the developing countries have to go through the process of industrialization, but it's also 2019. It's not like 1850. It's a different technological climate. They don't have to follow the exact same path that the developed nations took, because there's different technologies available. Yeah, who's to say we couldn't invest in better technologies for them to do that? There's going to be you're not going to be able to avoid it entirely, because they are going to industrialize, and no one's going to stop them from doing that. But why couldn't we try to help them take a better path?
Well, you know what? They did just open a Tesla Gigafactory in Shanghai, so
All right.
maybe we're on the way to better times.
Yeah. So there's an example. There's something we can agree on.
There you go. Well, good then.
Yeah, I don't know if it's possible. Yeah, my argument is not that it's possible to get off the the petro economy altogether and save the world. It's that we should try.
Hmm. Right.